Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing this morning?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. That's right. New Year. Good times. So some of you may or may not know, I actually spend a fair amount of time speaking at a Sunday church down in Harpswell, and they always follow the Revised Common Lectionary. And so that means the scriptures are assigned, and which is interesting because it kind of forces you to go places that you normally wouldn't go. All kind of have our own little hangout spots, right? That you want to go to time and time again. You're like, I was there before, that's good stuff. And it's been challenging. So today, I'm actually speaking there tomorrow. So I'm using their same passage, and it's from Ephesians. But it's a passage I wouldn't have chosen if I had been left to my own devices. Like, I would not have been here. But the more I read it, the more I'm like, oh my goodness, this is pretty heavy stuff. And Ephesians is probably the second book, just past Romans, which has the heaviest, meatiest, kind of like practical living stuff. In fact, I think actually Ephesians is a little more practical than Romans. Romans is like just straight theologian. You're the Bible student. Ephesians, he gets really practical, but he's also unloading a lot of stuff. And as you kind of read through the book of Ephesians, what you come to realize is he's got this general theme, but then in chapter 3, he has an aside. And so a lot of people don't actually cover this passage we're going to look at today because it's almost like he starts talking about something and he's writing this letter, or he's having it a scribe write this letter, and as he's saying something, it triggers this other thought in his mind, and he starts to take off. And he goes from basically the end of verse 1, some versions will actually have a dash, and he goes off on this little tangent until verse 13, and so like by 14 he's back into kind of the topic and the theme for that day. But as he unpacks this idea that got triggered, it is very, in my view, it's very important. It's very impactful. It's something that I was personally impacted by this week. So the sermon's called The Church on Display, and we'll understand more about that in a few minutes. I want to start off, and I kind of on a personal note, I think faith is really tough. Okay? I'm just going to throw that out there. Faith is really tough. And what I found is I don't think it's hard to believe necessarily in God. I don't believe that that's a hard thing to believe or think. There can be a lot of evidence or proofs that you could potentially use, and that is less troubling and disturbing for me on a number of levels than what the real challenge of faith is, and that's the believers that claim to have faith. That is, honest to God, the hardest part of doing this Christian life, or this life of faith, is too often we see fellow journeyers in this life of faith that do or say things that would personally offend us or hurt us. I have been hurt by the faith community. Maybe many of you have been hurt by the faith community. Maybe some of you have taken off from faith altogether. Maybe you've never been a part of, and you're like, I just want to look at this. And what I'm going to tell you at the outset is there's a lot of misconceptions. And yet, so when we talk about church as being on display, there can also, that means almost like there's a lot of pain, or there could be a lot of pain with that. And I know I'm talking up here, it'll make sense in a better way in a minute here. Let's just kind of dive into this. So church on display, we're going to start it right at the beginning, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 1. We're just going to read those 13 verses. I'm going to make some annotations as we go, and hopefully an application or two. And so here Paul's writing, and this is kind of the main line thought that he's writing. He says all of this, and of course I'm reading from the Voice. I like that because it has some accuracy, because he had some good scholars, biblical scholars, grappling with the original language, and then they coupled them with poets and musicians and songwriters and people who can make language sound pretty. And so here we have, this is the verse I'm reading, so chapter 3, verse 1. All this is exactly why I, Paul, am a prisoner. Right? So he's talking about being in prison and suffering. And so for the gospel, he's writing this community that undoubtedly is having some pain and suffering. And this triggers something in Paul's mind. So he says, I'm a prisoner of the anointed, his representative to the outsider nations. All right, now this is very important. He's talking about pain and suffering. He's talking about outsiders. Insiders and outsiders, essentially. So there's these two classes of people, and Paul is now on the outsiders. He is not only the outsider, he is a representative to the outsider nations. There's always an us-them in this world, is what I've found. There's the insiders and there's the outsiders. And if you were going to ask people who don't have any faith at all, they would say that there's a great evolutionary reason for this. And it's really about survival. They would say we tend to trust people that look like us, or that think like us, or that believe the same things we believe. And the more divergent the way they look, or the way they think, or the way they behave from our standards, the less we can accept them. We don't know if we can trust them. They seem unsafe to us, right? They're the other, and so too often we see this in our modern world, where if someone doesn't have the same skin color and this is hard. This is an interesting passage for me to talk about, because I think in American society and culture, I would be an insider just because I'm a white male, right? And so here I have to say, let's put myself in the place of an outsider. And so if I was not a white male, my interaction might be a little different. But because I'm white and a male, you say, oh, I can trust other males, or I can trust other white people. But this really cuts across a lot of lines. This creates and just acknowledges, maybe I should say it this way, acknowledges that there's a lot of lines in society. And so too often we say, well, they don't look like us, so we can't trust them, right? Their skin tone is not the right skin tone, and they have to look like me. Or they need to be from my country before I can trust them. Or they have to have my sexual orientation before I can trust them. Or they have to be a Republican like me before I can trust them, their value system and belief system. Or they have to be a Democrat before I can trust them, right? And so we have a lot of insider and outsider, and this is true in any area. In fact, this is also true in the church, right? We have insiders that are allowed into church, and we have outsiders, people that we would look down on, or, hey, you still need to grow. You still need to kind of do a little work and you're going to get there. And so we have a lot of insider and outsider, those who have and have not. And Paul says, I am on the outside. Paul, think about this. Paul the apostle. Paul who saw in vision the risen and vivified Christ, right? Who gives him this gospel commission. Paul, all right, who personally met with the risen Lord, he's an outsider. Think about that just let that sink into your brain for a moment. If Paul's an outsider, I'm kind of host. All right? A lot of us are. Paul is saying, I am an outsider and I'm a representative to the outsiders in this world and in this life. In fact, it's interesting what he does. And because of the thought that he talks about here, he starts to expand this in a lot of different interesting directions. And he's going to tell and share things with the Ephesians in this passage that he says have been mysteries from the beginning. That he's going to lay down new truth that has never been seen before. You can read the Old Testament, you're not going to find what Christ is actually doing here and what God has called Paul, a prisoner, to the outsiders to do. All right? And what Paul does is really Paul, and I'm going to spoil it a little bit. Maybe I won't. We'll just keep going. We'll let it unfold naturally. So Ephesians chapter 3, verse 2. So we know what he has, and now we're on the tangent. Okay? He says, you have heard, haven't you, how God appointed me to bring his message of grace? Now, grace, this is like a key word, and this is one we're going to have to grapple with, especially when we get to this concept of insider and outsider. Right? Because who is grace for? Is it grace for insiders or outsiders? I would argue it's for outsiders, because grace means it's unmerited favor. If you're an insider, see, because I'm a white male, you deserve to be treated differently, right? Because you're sexual attraction, because you are a Republican, because you're different, because you're, right? You have entitlements. There's like perks to being an insider. So grace is for the outsiders. So when Christ hung out with the prostitutes and the publicans and the scum of the planet, he was offering them this grace, which we can think of this, and some theologians will say this, some speakers will say this, it's God's unmerited favor, like you can't earn it. It's been given to you. It's worth, it's value. And so here Paul was saying, I am a representative of the outsiders, and I have been given this message. I have been given this message of grace. And some people would say that's the gospel or the good news. He's going to talk about that. And so he says, I'm a representative of the outsiders, but don't feel bad. He's really talking about pain and suffering in this life, right? We're going to go into pain and suffering. But he says, I don't want you to feel bad that I'm in prison. I have been given a message of grace. As an outsider to the outsiders, I've been given this message of grace. And he goes into verse 3. And now the mystery was made known to me, and how the mystery, was made known to me in a revelation. I briefly wrote about it earlier. So he's saying that the message that was given to him is a message of grace, and now he's adding to that. He's saying this message is also a mystery. All right? Mystery means we have never heard, we don't know the outcome, it's counterintuitive. So if you read a mystery novel, if you watch a movie that's a mystery movie, what happens is there's a lot of false paths that you can go on, right? The author, I think intentionally, if you're reading a mystery, for example, they will start to implicate different characters in the book. And you start to think, aha, I know what's going on here. I know who killed this person. I know who stole that item. I know. And then pretty soon, you start to find it's a dead end. And then the author might start to implicate another character in the story. And again, you start to feel like, okay, I know what's going on. And then at the end, right, the curtain is pulled back. And there's Oz, right, at the control board. And you can totally see and understand. He says, what I'm about to tell you, this message of grace was a mystery. And it's only now being revealed, right? It's only now being revealed, and this mystery is kind of mind-blowing, and we're going to talk about it. So he's verse 4. When you read what I have written, you will be better able to understand the depth of my insight into the mystery of the Anointed One. So he's bringing Christ back into it. We're going to just keep going. A mystery that has never before been shown to past generations. So this is brand new. You're getting it live here this morning, right? Only now are these secrets being revealed to God's chosen emissaries and prophets through the Holy Spirit. So this is hot off the press. What's he going to say? Specifically, and this is where he tells us what the mystery is in verse 6. Specifically, the mystery is this. By trusting the good news, the Gentile outsiders are becoming fully enfranchised members of the same body, heirs alongside Israel, and beneficiaries of the promise that has been fulfilled through Jesus the Anointed. So he's saying this is a new mystery. And you're like, I've kind of heard this before. He's saying the outsiders are now insiders in the new economy of God. And this is the good news. This is the grace that's been given. And I am the chief messenger of this grace, this message. I am following after Jesus the Anointed, right? And a couple things here. He starts to really mess with the lines because we know what's safe. Insiders are safe. Paul was a Jew. He should be an insider. And he talks about this. He says, look, if other people come and they try to brag to you and tell you that they're the elite, they're the insiders, he says, I want you to understand that I am more elite than they are, based on their worldly standards. He says, I was born a Jew. I was circumcised on the seventh day. I was, educated by Gamaliel, one of the chief scholars in his era, in his day, in age. He says, I was basically going into the higher echelons of the Jewish political and power structure and environment. He's like, in fact, I was so zealous that I was going out and I was bringing Christians to Jerusalem so that they could be jailed, imprisoned, or put to death. And I was doing this. I was so zealous. I was the insider. And everybody who wasn't like me was an outsider. Everyone else was an outsider. And yet now he says to these Ephesians who are outsiders, he says the message, the gospel of grace that I'm giving you today is that the outsiders are now insiders. And it goes, I think, a little deeper than that. It goes a little deeper than that. So Paul knows that he by nature is an insider, but he rejects that and he aligns himself as an outsider. He aligns himself as an outsider, and here's the crazy thing. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, which I'm not going to do this morning, Paul says, I become like all things so that I might win some. So he says, to the Greek, I became a Greek. Right? To the Jew, I became a Jew. To those bound under the law, I became like one bound under the law. And those without a law, I became, right? He became all things to all men that he might win some. And the crazy thing is he says, I will even align myself with the Jews that I might win some. So he's saying the Jews are outsiders. He's saying the Jews who believe themselves to be insiders are actually outsiders, but he will behave and dress and act as though he were a Jew, right? A spiritual Jew, so that he might have the opportunity to win some Jews to the faith. Some insiders, some white males, some Republicans, some Democrats, whatever your insider language is today, whatever it is that you believe to be right, he is saying, I will become like you so that you can finally be an outsider and actually get some grace. All right? Because you are in desperate need of some grace, my friend. Right? I don't know your life, but I do. All right? And so the problem is too many today who are on the inside, they're so fearful, they want to keep everybody at arm's distance, right? You stay away, you don't have the right skin tone, you have the right sexual orientation, you don't have the right political ideology, once I teach you and train you, maybe then you can be part of the in crowd. You know what, if you study hard enough and long enough and you learn enough of our teachings and doctrines, maybe then we'll accept you into baptism and into our fellowship, right? Well, you got to work at it, okay? There's no free ride in here, right? Because it's a works-based way of operating. Is an insider and outsider, an us versus them mentality. And the gospel blows it to smithereens, right? And those very people who believe themselves to be insiders are the true outsiders in the new economy of God, right? And this is why Paul has denounced and died to everything that made him a great insider. He disowned his Jewishness. He got rid of his Roman citizenship. He'd get beaten, and then only after the fact say, is it lawful to be a Roman citizen? I don't know. You guys tell me. And everyone's quaking and shaking, right? He would do all these things so that he could stay firmly planted as an outsider, because he knew it was the outsiders who got access to the grace of God. It was the outsiders who had access to salvation and forgiveness and mercy and on and on and on, right? It opened this door, and so he had to die to effort himself so that he might live this new life. Not this life of victory and blessing and pain-free living, right? Too often this is what we say as a Christian. Guys, if you're struggling, if you have some pain, if you got some problems, if you got a health problem, you come to Jesus. Jesus is going to take care of you, right? As soon as you get your first dollar hits that offering plate, there's going to be blessings coming down from above, right? There's blessings flowing from heaven. As soon as you start to pray earnestly, your problems are going to disappear. And yet Paul is in prison. He's been beaten countless times, shipwrecked, nearly killed, beaten with rods, stripped, on and on and on he goes, and he says, it's because I'm an outsider. And I'm getting I am being treated the way outsiders are being treated by this world, in the economy of this world. But this economy doesn't work in the long run, right? Because this economy is temporal, and the economy of God is eternal. Does it make sense? We starting to tap in? Well, Paul is about to take this to the next flipping level. He's about to this is tough, okay? Like, I can track with what he's saying, but he's going to go, by verse 10, you're going to go, Paul, I'm sorry, dude. You've gone too far, right? You've gone too far. And yet, it's going to be tough. All right. This somehow, we can still sort of own, but Paul isn't done yet on this tirade. He continues to verse 7. I became a servant and a preacher of this gospel by the gift of God's grace. as he exercised his amazing power over me. And so he wants to be an outsider so that the grace of God may be bestowed upon him richly. And this is his message. This is a gift. It's all gift. It's not owned. It's not earned. It's not inherited because of some birthright, because you happen to be the right color or born in the right country, right? He's saying all of this is gift. All of this is gift. All of this is God. Verse 8, I cannot think of anyone more unworthy to this cause than I. Why? Because Paul used to think a lot about himself. He used to think he was all that in a bag of chips, right? And because he thought that he was all that in a bag of chips, and he thought that more intensely than others, he goes, I am less deserving of this grace than other people because I thought I was the insider of the insider, right? And that was my downfall. So essentially, like everything we're talking about, imagine Paul, like 1 Corinthians 9, where he becomes a Jew to save the Jews. What if we said today, I act like I'm in Seventh-day Adventist, that I might win some Seventh-day Adventists, right? I mean, that's how you have to hear what Paul was saying, because this is some heavy stuff. And you're like, I'm trying to convert some people into, so they, like this doesn't make sense, right? We don't even know what to do with this. And yet Paul is just gushing this stuff off. This has only been said, he started in verse 2, right? We're like 7 verses into this, and he is already just offloading, and just wait till we get to verse 10. That's going to get crazy. So he says, I cannot think of anyone more unworthy to this cause than I, the least of the saints, right? So he doesn't even want to be an insider outsider. He says, I want to be on the outsider of the outsiders. I was on the inside of the insider, and I want to abandon that, and I want to be not only an outsider, I want to be on the outside of the outsiders, right? Because the further on the outside, the less I'm going to build walls that divide myself from other people because of their race or because of their sexual orientation or because of the way they look or because of their nationality or their political ideology. He says, the more I become an outsider, the fewer walls I'm going to have, the more grace I am going to receive and give to other people in my life. And this is a life without fear. All right? The Bible says perfect love casts out fear. This is what it means when you're not afraid of someone who has a different skin tone than you. This is what it looks like when you don't have, judgment or fear that someone is from a different faith community than your own. Right? We say, oh, it's Muslim. We got to be afraid. Right? Hold on. Right? We are the worst of the worst. We're the least of the least. There's no like humps. There's no higher ground at the foot of the cross. It's all level. Right? It's all level, which means Paul says, if you get grace by being an outsider, then I want to be the outside of the outside, so that I might more fully be blessed and receive the grace that has been given by God through His Son, Jesus Christ. So he says, I want to be the least of the least. I'm going to suffer. I want to suffer the worst, right? Because of the message I've been given. But here I am. Here I am. A grace-made man. Privileged. Think of the word here. Privileged to be an echo of His voice and a preacher to all the nations of the riches of the Anointed One. Riches that no one ever imagined. He says, you're feeling bad for me because I'm in prison, and I am not imprisoned. My imprisonment is my greatest joy. My suffering. And you have to realize, he's talking to the Ephesians. Have you guys read about Paul's ministry to the Ephesians? Acts chapter 16, he comes in, he just picked up Timothy not long before, he's there with Silas. They're doing this great ministry, going into the courts every day and the agoras, and they're preaching the word until this young servant girl was following around saying, listen to these guys, she's got the truth, they've got the truth. Well, this little girl, the prophet, was making money for owners, and Paul was so annoyed with her one day, he says, be gone, spirit be gone. And this woman lost her earning power for her powerful owners. And they immediately went to the officials of the city, and without a trial, Paul and Silas were rushed right into the center of town. They were stripped naked to humiliate them. They were beaten with rods, not like just a couple hits. They were beaten, bloodied with rods. Then they were dragged to a cell, and they were chained, not comfortably. All right? They're naked, they're cold, they've been beaten, they're imprisoned, right? This isn't even a trial. They could die there. And Paul and Silas, having been beaten for the sake of the gospel, having been stripped bare for the sake of the gospel, you know what they do? The Bible says they begin to sing. And they're singing praises to God. That they were able, they were worthy to suffer for His glory. And as they sing, there's a strange earthquake that takes place, and it's shaking, and it only shakes their chains off. And it shakes the doors of their cell open. No other damage. So he says, my chains and my imprisonment and my suffering are only further cause to rejoice because I am going to be closer to the Savior that suffered for me, that was imprisoned for me, that went to hell for me. But because of that, I am free. Right? See how counterintuitive this is? He says, I'm going to be this outsider, so I may be a grace-made man. Are we grace-made men and women today? Do we rejoice in our suffering and our trials, just that our voice might be an echo of the voice of the one that saved us? May His suffering be our riches. We haven't even gotten to verse 10 yet. All right. We'll get there. Verse 9. He says, I am privileged to enlighten all of Adam's descendants to the mystery concealed from previous ages by God, the Creator of all, through Jesus the Anointed. You know why he talks about Adam here? You know why he's talking about Adam, right? Adam was the initial rebel, right? He was east of Eden, right? He got kicked out. He was the rebel. He was the initial first outsider. He got thrown out of the garden. And he says, from that time, humankind they were outsiders. Like all of heaven was going about their business, and then there's Earth, this little rebel planet in the middle of nowhere, that these are outsiders. And everyone in the universe can look and say, those guys need to be written off. Just wipe them out already. They have no value, no worth whatsoever. And yet, these outsiders, God said, no. Don't count them out because I'm going to give them worth. They may not have any inherent worth on their own, but that's not how worth operates. You know, like gold, worth happens within a relationship. It's agreed upon relationship. But it always is in the context of a relationship. You know why gold has value? Because there's a social contract between us. And we say, why gold? Because we just agreed gold would be valuable. Why is gold more valuable than silver? Because as society, as people, and this relationship, we decided that gold would have more value. There's no intrinsic or inherent, there's no molecular or chemical structure that somehow is worth more than another. It's simply stuff, right? And so it's only by your relationship, you seeing that gold is valuable, that gives it value, that gives it bargaining power in the society. And so God says they may be separated from me, the source of all value. But He says, you just watch. I'm going to reconnect with this little rebel planet. And I am going to give them back worth, but I'm not going to give them the worth that they're due because they're not due any worth. I'm not going to give them back value because, like what they had before. I am going to give them back infinite value and infinite worth. I'm going to give them more value than what they ever had or ever dreamt of before. And just about then, a couple angels had to pick their head off the ground, right? Because they're like, say what? This makes no sense whatsoever. And we haven't even gotten to verse 10. We're there. We're close. Right? But I want you to understand what's going on here. He's talking about Adam because Adam was the initial rebel. He was the outsider, and God gave him worth and value and grace. And this is a mystery. Why would God do that? What in the world was God thinking? In verse 10, here we go. Now this may not impact you like it impacted me, okay? And this is where I think Paul unveils this mystery to a degree that you will not find anywhere else. All right? This is unbelievable. He says, here's his objective. This is God's objective. Oh, man. Through the church. Through the church. Guys, I don't know what your experience has been with the church. I don't know if you watch the news and see what the church at large is willing to do to other people who don't look like them, who don't have the same socioeconomic class, or what the church will do to people who don't have the same sexual orientation, or people who don't have the same political ideology. The church, I'm almost speechless here, okay? And that's a big deal for me. The church, I had people in the church tell me, and these were people that were in charge of me, my boss, say, you are the problem with the church. If I even heard that you were going to be getting potentially a job, I would go out of my way to call and try to stymie that, to blow that up, because you in no way deserve any kind of spiritual leadership role, period. Right? I have been hurt. In fact, I think isn't Pastor Michael doing his PhD in spiritual abuse? I'm right? Like, I think his research is around spiritual abuse that happens predominantly in the church. And so you see all these injustices, and it's not the world, it's the church that's inflicting these. All right, so I want you to understand this in the framework that I'm looking at. And this is brand new, okay? So he says here in verse 10 that Christ does this. Why is Christ doing this mystery? What is this mystery? And he says, here is Christ's objective through the church. Oh man. He didn't say this isn't God saying through the death of my son. Through my son Christ. Okay, I can get behind that. I know I just need to continue to, I'm shocked a little bit. Paul is saying God's plan is through the church. Through the church. I'm like, what? I thought I was about ready to write this off. Okay? Come on, the church? There's more insiders in the church than anywhere else. There's more oppression in the church than anywhere else. There's more judgment in the church than anywhere else. Have you read Philip Yancey's, what's so amazing about grace, about the prostitute and the this and that? And Philip says, why don't you go to the church? And she says, don't you think I feel bad enough about myself? Why would I want to go to the church? Right? This is mind-blowing. Paul says, here is Christ, or God's objective through the church. He intends now to make known his infinite and boundless wisdom. We haven't even gotten there yet. I need to explain something else, right? So this is all still very much stuff you can get from the Old Testament, like I think Deuteronomy 4, something like that, 4 or 5. He says, if you as a people, Israel, will live my commandments and my statutes, you will be a light to the nations. Right? You will be a representative of what the divine is to the world. And we go, yeah, but if we use that to make ourselves elite, insiders, right? The Jews were like, oh yeah, I'm all that, right? Like I'm God's representative on the world to the world, and we distorted very quickly what Christ was trying to do. The church did that. But what he's about to say is beyond that. He's saying, now listen to this, the church, the broken, dysfunctional, messed up church, he intends to use the church to make known his infinite and boundless wisdom, not just to the world, not to lost and perishing souls, not to kingdoms and nations and principalities, he says, but to all rulers and authorities where? In heaven. in heavenly realms. Are you, what? Right? He's saying God is using this broken, dysfunctional, backward, elitist, judgmental, church, like what we see, these constructs, and God is going to use the church not only to be a witness and to help share and understand His mystery to the lost and perishing world, but to uncover His wisdom in doing all this to the watching worlds and beings in heaven above. Are you, what? Like, do you even, right? What? How do we get there? How do we get that out of this? And this is what happens. What happens is, and I'm going to try. We'll finish it up. Believe me. Essentially, we have no worth, no value. That's all of humanity. And God gives us this worth and this value, and by His gift of worth and value, that He says you are something. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are and because of who I am and your connection to me. Right? As soon as He says that, right, He gives us this worth and this value, and that value changes everything. All right? I am not the same person I was before I came to faith. That radically altered the course of my life forever. And it was based on this belief that somebody gave me worth and value and I didn't deserve it. I didn't earn it. It was a gift. And that changed everything. And because of that, I'm a different person today. And then when I lead a different life than what I naturally did, this is what the evidence of the gospel is. The world is only natural to protect yourself from the other, from someone different than you are. You want to protect your resources. You want to be an insider and have outsider. And the gospel, the church, the people of God, when they knock down these walls and they embrace people of other faiths and their own prostitutes and publicans and sinners of our day, what we would consider. And whether those are political sinners or whether those are sexual or whatever we want to say, right? When we kick those down and we offer grace where others give judgment, we reveal the gospel of God, the mystery from all of creation. And when the worlds that watch this church and its individuals, when they see you and they see me giving love to people and giving grace to people who haven't earned it, who don't deserve it, they start to say, we understand. We understand what you're doing, God. We can't fully get it because it's unfathomable. Why God would give grace to me, a sinner, makes no sense whatsoever. He would have been better off if He had just started from scratch. Right? Well, messed up that patch. Throw it out and let's start again. And that's not what God is doing. He's using His message of grace to change the hearts and lives of men, women, and children throughout the planet. And it doesn't matter what color their skin is, and it doesn't matter what political ideology they subscribe to, or who they're attracted to, or like a million things that seem very important to us, or if they have a lot of money or no money. God's doing that universally. It's His kingdom that's coming but is not fully realized. And so when we suffer and we see injustice even through the church, we can take heart because we know God's work is not going to fail. And even though it's dimmed at this time, His glory is ultimately going to be seen in the heavenly realms. Amen? This is incredible stuff. Let me just finish up this little tirade that Paul went on. If you bear with me, you've got a couple verses here. He says this, verse 11, this has been His plan from the beginning. One that He has now accomplished through the anointing of Jesus our Lord. He says this isn't like surprising. God wasn't surprised. He had this plan to send His Son from the very beginning, to give us worth and value, and by doing that very thing, to reveal His character in maybe one of the only ways that He knew how, because we wouldn't be able to grasp it otherwise. Verse 12, and this faithfulness to God has made it possible for us, outsiders, to have the courage we need and the ability to approach the Father confidently. Right? Because of His goodness, we don't have to be afraid anymore. We don't have to be afraid of other people. We don't have to be afraid about our future because our future is secure. Yeah, you still sin, I know. Right? But you have a good, good Father that loves you. He loves you the way you are. And that's never going to change. It's not based on doing, it's based on your sonship and your daughtership with your Heavenly Father. And finally, verse 13, before he kind of comes back into, Paul's tirades, right? Kind of ridiculous. Verse 13, he says, so I ask you not to become discouraged. Guys, if you're suffering today, don't be discouraged. If life isn't going the way that you'd hoped, and you gave some dollars in the offering plate, and still the bills roll in, and the bills are bigger than your attorney, don't be discouraged. When you're sick and you don't know what's going on, and the doctors are trying to figure it out, and why, God, why is this happening to me? Don't be discouraged. If you're praying today and you're saying, God, I need this thing. This isn't a want, this is a need, God. And the heavens seem to be silent, don't be discouraged. All right? This isn't about what you do or be good enough or how often you pray or how much you pray or how righteous you are when you pray. Your Father loves you. And He's given you grace by the simple fact that you don't deserve it. And He's hearing and He's answering your prayers not because you deserve it, but because He is good, He is God, and He is in love with you, and He's given you this worth and this grace. And so He says, don't be discouraged. To the Ephesians, that I am jailed for speaking out on your behalf. In fact, my suffering is something that brings you glory. Right? It's like a whole other sermon. I don't have time for it. You can have glory because the pain and the suffering that you're experiencing and that you're meeting with grace and you're living in this new way of life, it's actually not just bringing you glory, it's bringing the church glory, it's bringing God's glory to the worlds that are watching in heavenly realms. Amen? My challenge for you today is not to be an insider but an outsider. My challenge for you today is to break down walls that divide us through fear. And that we would put others in front of ourselves. And that we wouldn't constantly need and ask for blessings, but we would lean into the pain, into the suffering of this life because we know that we're just pilgrims and strangers here. And that one day, He will appear and we will be like Him. Amen.